As much as I enjoy focusing on the positive aspects of the Zelda series, every so often it can also be fun to do some nitpicking. You know, to be that guy who points out little mistakes that are ultimately of very little consequence and are only noticed by the hardest of hardcore lore freaks out there. And what better victim to choose than Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity? Because even if I'm wrong about things or you don't agree, at the end of the day it's just a spin-off title. Is the game canon? Is it not canon? Who the hell knows at this point? I'm still not sure about it. But whether it is or isn't canon, I think it's safe to say that it probably has little to no consequence for the future of the series. Yes, the story has been written and supervised by members of the original Zelda team, and it features some of the same voice cast. But the story itself takes place in an alternate timeline, which seems to have little to no bearings on the events of Breath of the Wild. At the very most, we might see counterpart characters from Age of Calamity make an appearance in Breath of the Wild 2. Like maybe Aster will show up along the way, as we don't know what his fate was in Breath of the Wild's timeline. Either way, since we're getting a new story DLC for the game in November, today I want to focus on some aspects which didn't make sense to me or are flat out mistakes or oversights on the part of the story writers for Age of Calamity. Now, some of these are more subjective than others, and some are about as nitpicky as it gets, so please don't get on me for it. It's just for good fun. And if you have your own explanations for some of these, don't share them in the comments below. Don't hesitate to share your ideas in the comments below. With that said, here are the biggest lore mistakes in Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity. Around Zoros Domain in Breath of the Wild, we can find a number of stone monuments which shed some light on the history of the Zora. One of these monuments tells the story about how King Dorephan did battle with a stray guardian, which had somehow managed to get close to Zoros Domain. This story is also mentioned in Breath of the Wild's complimentary book, Creating a Champion. Notice how it says that this happened after the Great Calamity, which makes sense, seeing as before the Calamity there were no corrupted guardians, they were either still buried or under the control of the Sheikah, and during the Calamity, Zoros Domain was never reached by the Guardians. It's only after the Calamity was already over that a stray Guardian left over from the war wandered into the Zora Highlands. According to the monument, the encounter with the Guardian is the reason why Dorephan has a scar on his forehead, a token of his triumph. And yet, in Age of Calamity, the King of the Zora already has the scar when first meeting him in Chapter 2, which is long before the Calamity even started. Now, I'm sure it's possible to explain this away. It is an alternate timeline, so maybe he got the scar from one of the monster attacks on the domain. It is a bit coincidental that he would get an identical looking scar from a monster, but oh well. One could also make the claim that due to the influence of Aster, a corrupted guardian managed to get into Zora's domain earlier. But you would think he'd at least mention it. Like, hey, what's up with those guardians you guys are building? One of them just came into the domain and tried to freaking kill me. Aren't they supposed to, protect us? But no, he never says anything about it. So the more likely scenario is that they simply reused Dorephan's character model from Breath of the Wild and forgot to remove the scar from his texture. A simple and understandable oversight, but an oversight nonetheless. I've had a gripe with this one ever since I first saw it while playing the demo of the game. Inside the Royal Ancient Tech Lab, Purah and Robbie have been studying Terraco, the little mini guardian who traveled from Breath of the Wild's timeline to the timeline of Age of Calamity. According to Purah, she's been able to extract visual data from the guardian's memory, photographs of Hyrule Castle and town in ruin. This is the moment they first discover what will happen in the future, giving them the advantage and opportunity to change the outcome. The issue is not the fact that Terraco has pictures of this happening. He is a robot, so I can believe that he keeps recordings of his visual observations. My problem is, how the heck did he manage to get all these different camera angles? Because remember, Terraco has laid dormant for at least 10 years, stored inside a box in Zelda's room. As soon as he wakes up, he only lingers in this timeline for about a minute or so. He crawls out of the box, looks out the window and sees that everyone is screwed, opens up a time portal almost immediately with a guardian stalker on his heels, and is flung inside the portal while being pursued by Malice. So how the hell did he get all these different camera angles of the destruction? You would expect that he only has visual data from his vantage point, out the window from Zelda's laboratory. The first picture makes sense. It seems like a shot of Castletown from a bird's eye perspective. But then there's shots on the ground from inside Castletown with the castle in the background, and another one from what seems like as far as the town walls, again while facing the castle. And according to Robbie, there should be even more pictures, but some of it was fragmented. There's no way Terraco had enough time to take take pictures from these vantage points. So what, did he hack into the other Guardians? Like he extracted the visual data from a Stalker or a Skywatcher? If so, why does he never use this ability in the rest of the story? You'd think it would be incredibly helpful to see from the vantage point of Ganon's army. You can predict their advances, their next targets, if someone's in trouble. Heck, he could have seen that King Rome made it out alive and spared Zelda the misery. But nope, he's just magically able to take pictures from impossible angles without any explanation. It's about as convenient as a plot device can get. This is a mistake that many people noticed pretty quickly when they first got a chance to play the game's demo. It's the second mission in the game, so it takes place early on. The narrator says that Zelda, Link, and Impa made their way to a research facility in Hateno. This is an obvious mistake in the script. The facility they are visiting is the Royal Ancient Tech Lab, which is not in Hateno, but rather close to the Breach of Demise on the other side of the map. They somehow mixed up this facility with Purah's Tech Lab, which is found close to Hateno. This lab also wouldn't be built until long after the Calamity. The voice actor for King Rome probably already recorded the line and they simply decided to just leave it as it is, instead of going back and having to re-record again. I'm not entirely sure if this mistake is also present in the Japanese version or any of the other languages for that matter. If it is or isn't, I'm curious to hear about it from you guys. Out of all mistakes mentioned here today, this one is by far the most subjective one. I think it's a mistake that they used a tapestry to illustrate the game's story at the beginning. As cool as it looks, it was meant to depict a battle from 10,000 years ago when the Guardians and the Divine Beasts were first built and the ancient heroes and the Sheikah monks of old succeeded in beating Calamity Ganon. No Guardians were taken over by Ganon as far as we know. It was a clean win against the Demon King. It was only because of this battle that Ganon came back with a new plan later and corrupted the mechanical army. I mean, sure, I get it. The tapestry is iconic, and from an animation standpoint, it looks cool to see the picture of Ganon starting to move and soar across the screen. But from a lore perspective, it only makes things unnecessarily confusing. The two characters we see here are not the Link and Zelda from Breath of the Wild. It's a different, unknown hero, and what we can assume is an earlier incarnation of Zelda. Terraco appearing behind her doesn't make sense story-wise, it's as simple as that. There is no tapestry of the Great Calamity from 100 years ago. In fact, the tapestry we see here is still a bit of a mystery. The only thing they changed to it is adding an additional champion on top of the 4 Divine Beasts, which also kinda spoils the fact that Riju, Teba, Yunobo, and Sidon will appear in the game. Imagine if we had no clue at all that this would happen. It would probably have made a much bigger impact. Again, from a design perspective, I get why they used it. It looks pretty, it's something people would recognize from Breath of the Wild, but it makes no sense at all when it comes to the pre-established lore. This one is a classic example of sacrificing story consistency for gameplay. One of the missions in Chapter 4, titled When Courage Fails, sees Zelda visiting the Spring of Courage inside the Faron province, right smack in the middle of the Zonai ruins, when they are suddenly ambushed by hordes of monsters trying to take out the princess once and for all as the heroes try to defend themselves and make their way out of the forest. One objective involves turning on these ancient water spouts to clear debris blocking the road. We can find a broken one lying around early on, and Zelda comments on it. Okay, cool, it works for the mission itself. I mean, shoot, half the objectives in the game involves activating some thingamajigs across the map to advance further, so yeah. But again, from a story perspective, it clashes with Breath of the Wild, because where are these ancient water spouts in that game? We don't find them anywhere. Adding things to the world as a way to create objectives is fine, but it can sometimes mess with the overall lore. Could they be destroyed in Breath of the Wild's timeline? I mean, sure, but I don't really see why that would be the case. They seem to be made from the same type of material as the Guardians, and they can still be seen laying around everywhere. So logically speaking, some of these ancient Super Soakers, or at least parts of them, should still be laying around in Breath of the Wild as well, right? Finally, I have some quick honorable mentions, things which didn't make it on the list because they were either too small of an issue, or because maybe they do have a clear explanation that doesn't require reaching too far. First is the map, which has a few small inconsistencies on it, like the ruins of certain locations which should still be standing. Most notable, the Merida Exchange, or Dea Village, which is somehow already submerged. Also, for some reason, they completely removed the Temple of Time and Eastern Abbey instead of making new versions of them on the map which are still intact. Next is Typhlo Ruins, which are shown without the black mist around it. I didn't include this one because, as far as I'm aware, it's never explained when this black mist started forming around these ruins. For for all we know, it didn't happen until after the Calamity when it was time to set up the trials for the hero, so it could have an easy explanation. Another one that I wanted to include but ultimately thought, whatever, is Hestu. Cause I get it, Hestu is a character that a lot of people like, so obviously they wanted to include him as a fighter. But when you really think about it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The Koroks are supposed to be invisible to almost everyone, and all of a sudden everyone can see him, including Rivali, the prick, Pure of Heart my ass, Paragus. What about the monsters? How are they able to see Hestu if he's supposed to be visible only to those pure of heart? From their vantage point, are they being beaten up by an invisible force? That would be pretty funny. But anyway, I decided to exclude this one because it's so obviously done to pad out the character roster without any care for the story. I mean, we get to fight as Calamity Ganon against Calamity Ganon. Yeah, totally canon stuff right there. The last one is more of a general mistake that is too big to explain in one video, and that is simply the overall story direction. This isn't really a lore mistake, but more so my own personal feelings of disappointment about the story. The time travel shenanigans that make it all way more confusing and inconsistent than it needed to be, the many way too convenient plot devices, the fact that the game was marketed as the prequel to Breath of the Wild while in reality having very little to do with the actual events from 10,000 years ago, etc. Because of all this, I just find it harder and harder to care about this story. It doesn't reveal anything new about the lore of Breath of the Wild, it doesn't have any impact on Breath of the Wild 2, heck, as I said, we still don't even know if this game is supposed to be canon or not. But even if it is, it's so disconnected that it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And judging from the general reaction to the new story DLC of the game, it seems like I'm not the only one who feels that way. It was a fun game with some amazing cutscenes and cool new characters, but that's about it for me. Now, I'm not ruling out that the new story DLC might explain some new stuff. We do see a new depiction of the moment Terraco awakens, which is supposed to take place in Breath of the Wild's timeline. Maybe it even explains the inconsistency I mentioned earlier about the weird camera angles, who knows. From what I can gather, the story seems to be sort of a prequel to some of Age of Calamity's events. Perhaps it shows how Aster first came into contact with Calamity Ganon from the future, something which I pointed out in my review of the game was sorely lacking from the game's narrative. I think this new story might have something to do with that which Robbie mentions inside the Royal Tech Lab, namely that there is even more information inside Terraco, but it's been fragmented. The DLC is called Guardian of Remembrance, and it shows glass fragments with imagery on it. Maybe we'll see what happened after Terraco jumped inside the portal and before he ended up at the Sheikah Tower in central Hyrule, which is kind of an unexplained gap. The Guardian Stalker we see awakening here is likely the very same one that found its way up to the tower and into Zelda's laboratory to try and stop Terraco, and ultimately released its malice into the portal. So yeah, if I had to guess, it probably shows what Terraco and Calamity Ganon were up to before Link finds Terraco during the battle for Hyrule Field. Anyway, that wraps it up for today. A big thanks to all of you for watching, to my mods, my Patreons, channel members, and to Sonny Valicenti, Korok Dance, Banoon, and Twilight Wolfo. Thank you all so much for the support. I will see you all in the next video. This is Don signing off, and have a good one.